So let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Andrea Padilla, and I'm the events manager here at Alertus Technologies, and I will be your moderator for today. During this webinar, we will review your emergency preparedness and how your organization can develop training and exercise programs. Our sessions today will be from 1 to 2 p.m. and we'll begin with an in-depth presentation followed by a live Q&A session where you will have the opportunity to engage with our speaker to go over any questions or comments that are submitted during or after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you after today's sessions. If you have any questions following this presentation, please email us at events@alertus.com. Now I would like to introduce you to our speaker for today, Gil Savaldaver. He is the Director of Professional Services here at Alertus. His role helps Alertus customers develop and or enhance their emergency notification management program, Now with further ado, here is Gil.
Thank you, Andrea. And I want to welcome all of you back to the 10th installment of the Emergency Management Forums webinar series. And in today's webinar, and in honor of September National Preparedness Month, I want to focus our discussion on emergency preparedness and some steps your organizations can take to become better prepared to handle any type of disaster, whether that be natural, human caused, or technological. And when we think about emergency preparedness, it can be a very daunting task. It's a very broad term, so where do you begin? And I hear from our customers across the different verticals that they just don't know where to start, and they don't know where to best invest their time and their resources that will make a difference. So I recommend conducting an honest assessment of your current emergency management program. And the technical term of that assessment is called a Hazard and Threat Identification and Risk Assessment, or a THIRA, of your organization's capabilities to prepare for, to respond to, and to recover from all hazard emergencies. And these assessments will provide you a baseline of your current strengths and, more importantly, where your organization has those critical gaps and areas for improvement. And once you're armed with these results, you can start to identify your emergency preparedness strategies to not only improve your organization's preparedness, but your employees as well. We must not forget about our employees, because your success depends upon having a well-trained team that you can call upon during an emergency. And I think the best way to do this is to develop a training and exercise program that will help you prepare your organization and your teams to effectively respond to and recover from emergencies. And in Ventura County, we have this perspective. If we're not actively responding to an emergency, then we're rigorously training and exercising for one. This was one of our top priorities. The stakes are just too high. We have our residents depending upon us to save their life in an emergency. And as the county's training and exercise coordinator, I had the privilege of developing our countywide emergency training and exercise program. And I was given the freedom, the authority, and the resources to develop that program. And we were called upon on numerous times, and in one specific period, we had to simultaneously respond to an active shooter incident and 2 catastrophic wildfires, all converging at the same time, and they were in 2 different parts of the county. And as you can imagine, this was a very challenging period for our residents, for our first responders in the field, for our county family, and our emergency operations center team. But we got through it, and we had some great successes. And that success can be directly attributed to our investment in training and exercising our personnel, our plans, processes, and procedures, and our relationships with our partner agencies across Ventura County. So with that, let's get started with the review of today's topic areas. So I want to first start our discussion with a review of how the federal government defines emergency preparedness through the National Preparedness Goal. This includes a review of the 5 mission areas and the 32 core capabilities to meet the nation's goal. Then we're going to look at the 4 phases of emergency management, and then we're going to specifically focus on emergency preparedness. And then I want to walk you through the new training and exercise program template that's now available to all of our customers on the customer portal. And then we're going to end the presentation today with a discussion around a real-world case study. And this is an exercise that we put together for our county family that's focusing on tsunami preparedness, tsunami response plan. And then throughout the webinar today, Andrea will help me facilitate 2 interactive polls. I just want to get an idea of where you are with your training and exercise program. So the national preparedness goal is the federal government wants to create a secure and resilient nation with the capabilities required across the whole community to prevent, protect, mitigate, respond, and recover. Those are the 5 mission areas from threats and hazards that pose the greatest threat. So that's our federal government, our nation's preparedness goal. And then they came up with these 5 mission areas. So you have prevention, protection, mitigation, and those 3 I would say are pre-incident. Then we have response, and then recovery post-incident. And these 5 mission areas are the critical elements required to meet that national preparedness goal. And it requires the whole community approach. Now, what do we mean by whole community approach? What does FEMA mean by whole community approach? It means that government alone, so local, county, state, federal, tribal governments can't respond and recover to disasters by themselves. We need to create partnerships with the private sector, with nonprofit organizations, with non-governmental organizations, with our faith-based organizations, with our community groups, and then with our residents and the community as a whole. We all are being impacted by this disaster, by these disasters, and we all need to work together to be able to be effective in responding and recovering to them. And then FEMA also identifies what they call core capabilities, and there's 32 of them. So you can see at the very top of my screen, we have the 5 mission areas of prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. And then there are the 32 core capabilities listed here. And you can see some of them span multiple mission areas and some are for one specific mission area. But the first row there is planning. So this is involving emergency planning. It spans across all mission areas. Public information and warning. This is where the emergency notification comes into place. This is where information management during a disaster, that capability. And then operational coordination is how are we going to coordinate internally and externally to respond to and recover to these disasters. So those 3 cover all of the mission areas. And then if we're going to focus on prevention and protection, you can, as you read these capabilities, it feels very much like a homeland security perspective, and it is because it's talking about intel and information sharing, interjection and disruption, physical protective measures, supply chain integrity and security, forensics. So these are the things that we want to do pre-incident to stop or prohibit certain human-caused threats to occur. And then we have mitigation. Mitigation very much focusing on community resiliency, conducting hazard and threat assessments, identifying strategies to mitigate those hazards and threats, and then coming up with like vulnerability reduction as it relates to infrastructure. That's in the mitigation. Again, mitigation is unique because it could be pre-incident or post-incident. So you can do these things before you ever have an emergency occur at your jurisdiction or your organization, or you've had something occur and then you want to start developing some strategies to make sure that if it does occur again, because you can't stop certain hazards and threats from occurring, especially natural disasters, but you can mitigate their impacts to your to lives, to property, to environment, to your organization. And then you'll see a bulk of those capabilities are in the response mission area. And it represents all of our first responder communities. So we're looking at fire management, mass care services, mass search and rescue, focusing on those life safety, on-screen security, public health, healthcare, EMS. So these are the things that these are the capabilities that we need to save lives during an emergency. And then we have recovery, and recovery can be broken up into three areas. You can have short-term recovery, such as debris management. You can have midterm recovery or long-term recovery. So I would say short-term recovery could be days, weeks, midterm or mid-recovery is months, and then long-term would be years. And so those are the 32 core capabilities. Again, they're matched with those mission areas to meet the national preparedness goal. Now let's focus on emergency management and the 4 phases of emergency management. They're similar to the mission areas, but they're different. So we have emergency preparedness. This is where you're going to be investing a lot of time and resources in developing response plans. We have training and exercise, which we're going to cover in depth today. And then you have community outreach and education and awareness, making sure that our organizations are prepared, our employees, our recipients, our communities, our families are prepared to handle emergencies. And then we have the response phase. Response phase looking at life safety first and foremost, stabilizing the incident, property protection, infrastructure protection and preservation, limiting the disruption to your operations. We have recovery, looking at economic, debris, again, short-term, housing, health, social services, things of that nature. And then you have mitigation, which is very similar to preparedness. There's this education and awareness piece, conducting those hazard and threat assessments, the THIRA, and then coming up with strategies to improve, harden structures, coming up with those strategies to help you mitigate the effects of those hazards and threats to your organization. And then I want to specifically focus a little bit more on emergency preparedness. And so the first bullet here is building those relationships and partnerships with internal and external partners. I think this is one of those preparedness activities that isn't thought of necessarily all the time. Folks don't necessarily invest a lot of resources and time in building those relationships, but I'll tell you that bit will bring you dividends in an emergency. You want to build those relationships before the emergency ever occurs. You want to meet with your internal stakeholders or your external stakeholders like law enforcement, the fire department, your healthcare sector. You want to work with them and understand what their capabilities are. You want them to understand your capabilities and how you can work together in an emergency, which is what we call operational coordination, right? As an emergency is unfolding, we don't want to meet these folks for the first time. That can prohibit the effective response to an emergency. But if you meet with them beforehand, and you have those relationships and you have those meetings and you're having those trainings and exercises together, you feel more confident. They feel confident in your capabilities. And then you can, and I've seen this firsthand, your incident response will go that much more smooth. Your recovery will go more smooth. It's just going to provide so much benefit during your incident management. And then we have emergency plan development. So you can have an overarching emergency plan, which we call emergency operations plan or an emergency response plan. You can have hazard mitigation plans, or you can have hazard or incident specific plans or functional plans that are annexes. And I'll give you an example. A hazard or incident specific could be an earthquake response plan, hurricane response plan, active shooter response plan. And a function might be an evacuation plan or a shelter in place plan or a mass care services plan. And then the last two is what kind of the template that I'm going to be discussing is really focusing on is that training and exercising of your personnel and your organization, right? You want to do both. And then building up those personnel qualifications, building their knowledge, skills, and competencies. And this is where the first responder community does a lot on the credentialing, right? So if you want to serve a certain position in the field, if you want to be a hazmat technician, you're getting credentialed. If you want to be an incident commander, you need to get credentialed. If you want to be the operations section chief or the plans section chief, all of these positions that are critical in an emergency response, you can credential these folks so you understand that they're at a certain proficiency level. As an organization, you feel comfortable that you know they have the knowledge and the skills to be able to serve in that position and serve in that position during an emergency. Like I said, we're going to focus on these two things when we talk about the template. All right, so our first poll question, we'll have Andrea launch this poll, is do you have a training and exercise program in place? Andrea and I will give you 10 seconds to put in your responses, and then we'll review them as a group. All right, and the responses could be yes, no, or you're not sure. All right, we'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay, so we have, which is great, 55% said yes, they do have a training and exercise program in place, followed by 36% said no, and then 9% said not sure. Okay, so that's good. Like overall, our folks do have a training and exercise program in place, which is great to hear. That's exactly what I want to hear. And the folks who said no, then this template might really be of benefit to you, because I'm going to walk you through some of the elements that you can include in your training and exercise program. All right, so what's the purpose of a training exercise program? It's to test, to evaluate, to validate, and improve. And you're focusing on response capabilities, your plans, processes, procedures, and agreements. You want to clarify roles and responsibilities. That goes back to that building those partnerships and relationships. Internal and external coordination. That's the operational coordination capability. We want to build individual as well as collective confidence and knowledge and skills around a certain plan, processes, or procedure. And then we want to identify strengths in our current program. We want to also be honest and identify those gaps. And then how can we improve for the next time, which we call corrective actions. So what are those corrective actions that we can implement after the real world incident or after this exercise that we can now incorporate into our program and modify our plans, processes, and procedures? And then FEMA mentions this, what they call a progressive approach to training and exercise, which is building on your previous training courses and exercise. And I always like to use the crawl, walk, run, right? And it just depends on your organization. There's some organizations that really follow the progressive approach, and they don't, let's say, jump to the walk or the run phase with their training or their exercises. But I think if you're if you're an organization that does not have a training and exercise program in place and you're starting to build that capability, then I would definitely recommend focusing on the crawl, walk, run. All right, so focusing now on the training aspect of the training and exercise program. So I have 3 topic areas that you can build out your training component. First is incident management and response. This is where you have what we call the incident command system. This is the national standardized system that we use to manage emergencies. We're all using this in the field or in the EOC. At the EOC level, it's a modified incident command system approach, but we're all using the same methodology of incident command system. So this is where you can build that overall incident management, incident response capability and knowledge and skills. Then, because we're all about focusing on emergency notification, this is the field where it's under the crisis and risk communication field. And there's a number of resource training courses that you can take to be a better practitioner at sending out emergency notification. And then with the Alerta system, I've added this third component that talks about some of the trainings that we provide as a company. These are trainings that are available on the customer portal, and these are trainings that are actually put on by our training team. And these are trainings or system awareness, system configuration, and system activation. So those 3 topic areas are included. You can definitely add more if you want to, but these are the 3 that I've given you to start off your program with. And these are meant to build those core competencies, that knowledge, skills, confidence in actually performing these roles in an emergency. And then when we're looking at the exercise, now shifting to exercises, I want to mention the exercise cycle. So first and foremost is designing and developing your exercises. In the next slide, I'll show you what options you have available that's kind of along the crawl, walk, run methodology. So first and foremost, you want to identify what exercise you want to do. You want to design and develop it. Then you conduct your exercise. While you're conducting your exercise, you're evaluating, and you can do it while or after, right? In the after action review of your exercise, you're evaluating, and then you're trying to develop those corrective actions focused on the exercise design, right? How well did we do putting on this exercise for our personnel? Did they find it valuable? Did we create confusion? Was it too easy? Was it too hard? Did our folks come out of this exercise thinking, oh man, their confidence is deflated, and they're just saying, I really hope that we never face this emergency ever, because I don't feel confident enough to be able to respond to it. And that's what we want to prevent with our exercises. So as an exercise and training coordinator, I was always looking to improve the exercise design and execution and getting better. And especially as you start putting these on, you'll notice that you become more efficient and you come better, and you start hitting that sweet spot of putting on an exercise that is complex enough and hard enough, but not where you're not going to be able to have them feel successful, and an exercise that's going to build their confidence. So again, it's more of an art than a science to build an exercise that does that, but that's the goal, is to make it challenging, but not too hard where they come out of it feeling more scared than when they went into your exercise. All right, so there's two exercise types. We have discussion-based versus operations-based. Discussion-based exercises is exactly what it says. You're discussing or you're developing your plans, agreements, your training, or your procedures. You want to focus on high-level strategy, policy, and the overall governance. You're simulating the action because it is a facilitated conversation, a facilitated discussion. And this is your least complicated exercise format. And this would be your crawl or your walk phase. And then you have operations-based, which is validating and improving. This is where you're focusing on action-oriented activities. You're actually going to be moving resources here. So you're going to deploy resources and personnel in the field, and you're going to move them around. And this is your most complex. And this is your run phase. And the reason why I say it's best to focus on the crawl and the walk, it's easier and quicker to put on discussion-based. It takes less time from your personnel or your team members, right? It's less of their time that they need to be involved in your exercise. And then what you can do is you can schedule these less complicated, easier exercises. You schedule these ones first, you build that confidence, you build that knowledge and that awareness, and then you lead up to a operations-based. If you just jump into an operations-based, I can tell you it's very costly. I've put on an operations-based exercise that cost the county $500,000. It was multi-day exercise. It was 4 days long. It involved a lot of jurisdictions from local, county, and state, but they can be very expensive. It took us over 1.5 years to actually develop that exercise. So there's a lot more time commitment. There's a more time commitment of your personnel. So it's just operations-based are vital, but they're very difficult to put on. So I just mentioned that just for your awareness. All right, so what types of discussion-based exercises can you put on? And the three primary ones are seminars, workshops, and tabletops. So a seminar is when you're briefing your participants. You're trying to explain them an existing strategy, plan, policy, or procedure. So you're educating them on those plans. You may make changes. That's more for a workshop, but you want to provide a common framework and understanding. So usually a seminar is a good place to start. If you've just developed a new plan, policy, or procedure, a seminar is a great way to brief it out to your participants, to your team members. Now in a workshop, this is where you actually want to get their feedback and you want to develop the plan. So seminar, the plan's already in place. A workshop is when it might not be in place and you want to improve it. It's either you want to develop it, you want to enhance it, or you want to improve it. And so you're collecting information and you're also sharing information. And a tabletop, the most popular discussion-based, is you're trying to come up with like a conceptual understanding. You're trying to identify strengths and weaknesses and corrective actions. This is where you're doing problem solving through discussion. And the success of a tabletop and the other two is really on that facilitator. The better the facilitation, the better the exercise. And I've seen great facilitation that really got the most out of the participants, because our team members, most of them don't want to speak. They just want to soak up that information. But a facilitator really brings out those conversations. They identify strengths and weaknesses, and then they elaborate on them, and they have these additional rich conversations, which are always very valuable to have. And then you're also rehearsing concepts and your response actions. You're not doing them, you're rehearsing them. So in an active shooter, if we received an active shooter threat, are we going to shelter in place? Are we going to evacuate? Are we going to send a response team? Or are we not? We're talking about these things in a safe environment, and we're trying to figure out if our plans are really going to be effective or not. And if they're not, then we're going to change them. Now, when we're looking at operations-based exercises, there's 3 here as well. So a drill is when you have a specific plan, policy, or procedure. It's usually one, or a function or capability, and you're trying to drill on this. This is what the fire department and law enforcement do almost on a daily basis, right? They have a certain policy and they're exercising on it to make sure that their personnel are familiar with it, understand it, and can execute it. So that's when we do drills. Functional exercise, this is my favorite. This is probably the most popular operations-based one. Is when you're going to be testing and validating multiple functions, sub-functions, or groups of functions. So whenever I put on an emergency operations center exercise, I always conducted a functional exercise. We're simulating all the field activity. This is where you can bring in a simulation cell, where you can have folks that are not part of the exercise. They're there, they have a script, and they're injecting scenarios to your team and having your team try to deal with them. So you're simulating stress and you're simulating complexities, and you're having your folks work on them and problem solve. And you're going all the way up until you're actually moving resources in the field. That's when we go into a full scale. So the full scale is very similar to a functional, but now you're taking those same concepts and you're integrating multiple agencies, multiple jurisdictions. You're having them bring their tools, so to speak. Law enforcement is going to bring all of their resources. Fire department is going to bring their resources. Your emergency medical services are going to bring their ambulances, and you might have your transportation department and your mass care and shelter component. You're going to maybe set up a shelter and have evacuees come into your shelter, and you're going to have resources for them. So this is like a lot of moving parts. These are very complex. A lot of things are going on. In one exercise, you might have multiple exercise locations. So your first scale might be 3 different locations. And your exercise team, that's going to be your observers and your evaluators, are going to be enormous as well. So a lot of resources involved when you put on a full scale, but they're valuable. So kind of usually how we do it with the crawl, walk, run, maybe start off with a seminar or a workshop as the crawl phase. The walk phase would be that tabletop. And then we move into functional, which is the walk or run, depending on how complicated it can be. And then your full scale is the run. So you can lead up to it. All right, so our next poll question, which we'll have Andrea launch momentarily, is when was the last time you hosted a training and exercise at your organization? So I'll let Andrea launch the poll, and here I'll give you 10 seconds. So well, we have a number of responses here for you that you can choose from. All right, so you can choose from 0 to 6 months. So this was recent, or you did this within the last year, or it's been over a year, or you're not sure. All right, the responses are coming in. So we have, okay, they're still trickling through. So we have 71% of the respondents said that they've conducted a training or exercise in the last 6 months, which is great to hear. We had 1 response come in the last over a year, and then 1 response came in that they weren't sure. Okay, overall, that's really good results, that you've hosted something in the near future, we really want to keep up with that exercise schedule. And to help to do that, so part of the template then focuses on the multi-year exercise schedule. It's always recommended to do a multi-year, at the very least a 2-year schedule, so you can start to plan what those hazards or threats or functions or capabilities that you want to improve on. And I provide you an example here on the slide. It's also provided in the template. So we have a number of categories here. First category is the focus year. Then what's the exercise type? Again, focusing on the crawl, walk, run, hazard or function. So what is the hazard or the function you want to exercise? And then providing a description and maybe some objectives. And this is very high level, right? This is not providing a lot of detail here. This is just an awareness for your organization so you can plan ahead. You can plan your budgets around this. You can plan time around this. So I give an example. Focus year might be in 2022, what do we want to accomplish? We're coming to the end of 2022, but it might be a 2022, 2023, 2024 plan. Here I give you a mix of workshops, tabletops, and a functional, which all build on each other. The hazard could be natural, human-caused, or technological. You could have one focused on core capability, like the 32 core capabilities we just mentioned, or it could be function-based, like evacuation, coordination, or emergency notification system, activation, whatever those critical functions that you're going to use in an emergency. And so you can start to build off of this. And then just give an example for the description. We're going to develop a hazard or threat response plan. We're going to evaluate or validate that hazard or threat response plan. We're going to be evaluating our function-based procedure. So this is just an example of what these exercises can look like. And then lastly is providing that this is the last part of the template, which is your exercise details. So here we have 4 categories as well. So you want to name your exercise if you can, provide that exercise year. Here's we want to spell out those objectives very clearly, and then provide a much more specific description here. So for example, when we provide the name, it could include the exercise type. So I'll give you an example. So you could say like jurisdictions, hurricane workshop, or jurisdictions, active shooter, full scale exercise. So I've seen these, very, when we're talking about full scale, I've seen folks use like Operation Ready, Ventura County, for example. That was our last full scale exercise that I was involved in. So they use the words like operation, and you can get very creative with this. So you can name your title. The exercise year, again, you can keep it generic and just provide the year, or if you know more specific, the date, the month, or the time, you can include those. The objectives, you want to include at least 3 to 5 exercise objectives. You can have more, but I feel like 3 to 5 is the sweet spot. And then when you're constructing these objectives, you want to follow the SMART methodology, which is your objectives should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and have some kind of time associated with them. And lastly, that description. So this is, again, we're going to provide more detailed description. Here, we're going to provide the purpose of the exercise. And then we're also going to include what hazard or threat, function, or capability we're trying to accomplish. You can also include what jurisdictions are going to be involved. So if it's just, or like if you're thinking internally, which departments are going to be involved? Is the leadership team going to be involved? If you're going to reach out to external stakeholders, who are those folks? And what's the purpose of engaging them into your exercise? So that's where you can really provide those descriptions and those details. All right, so that's the exercise template. Now, how can you access the template? So if you navigate to help.alertis.com, here's the landing page. If you do not have access to the customer portal, if you click on this hyperlink where it says Alertis Technical Support, you can email our technical support team. They'll confirm that you are a customer, and they'll issue you your credentials, and then you can access our customer portal. At the very top, you'll see, so once you navigate to the customer portal, at the very top, you'll see professional services. And then if you navigate down on the page, you'll see emergency management resources. When you click on that, there's a whole list of emergency planning templates that I have available for you. And then the training and exercise program template is at the very bottom, and it kind of looks like that. You can download it into a Microsoft Word document, and then you can completely modify it, customize it to your environment and to your needs. All right, so now I want to shift focus. This is the last part of the webinar that I really want to focus on a real world case study. So I used to work for the Ventura County Sheriff's Office of Emergency Services. I was the exercise and training coordinator. And I picked an example of something that was that we put on very early on in my career. So this was back in 2012. And we had one of the topics that we had a new OES director that came in. We thought we had a very mature program at that time. And that OES director wanted to look into tsunami preparedness and what our tsunami response capabilities were. And we had our tsunami response plan in effect. It was old, it was probably 5 years old, and it'd been a long time since we've actually looked at it. Because as that OES director was asking questions about the response plan, he got this impression that we really didn't know what the elements of the response plan. We knew it existed, we knew some aspects of it, but we really weren't familiar with it. And so the OES director at that time took a different approach. So instead of doing the crawl, walk, run with the tsunami hazard, he went straight into a run approach. And so he chose to host a no notice after hours functional exercise focusing on the tsunami response plan. So whenever we're putting on exercises, especially functional exercises, we have 3 primary documents that we created. First was an in-briefing document. This is kind of the parameters of your exercise that you provide once your participants come in. I always like to start off with an in-briefing, just setting the tone for the exercise, setting the expectations, explaining what the objectives are, and then we follow it with the exercise scenarios. This is what they're going to be working on the next 4 hours. And then we have the objectives. So it's very clear what the objectives of the exercise are and what we want them to accomplish. So here's the in-briefing. So on Monday at 11 p.m., a 7.9 magnitude earthquake occurred off the coast of Alaska with the potential to generate a long-distance tsunami. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center has issued a tsunami warning for the coast of California. At 1 a.m., and this actually did occur, the OES director ordered the activation of the Ventura County Emergency Operations Center, and he sent out an emergency notification to activate all of our teams to come into the EOC at 1 a.m. So this was actually a phone call at 1 a.m. to have us come on, and it was a business day. I believe it was on a Tuesday. So this was Tuesday morning. We were asked to come in and do this tsunami exercise. And then we have one little brief thing here that we're only giving them one little bits of information here, is that a tsunami coordination call will be conducted at 3 a.m. So they have 2 hours to prepare for that call. And then they'll have that call, and then there'll be some additional work that needs to be done. All right, so here's the more in-depth of the scenario. So again, this is a tsunami warning. And then we have more information that we provide here, which is Ventura County will be impacted in the next 8 to 10 hours. That's our time frame. So that's when the tsunami inundation is expected. So we have time to work on some things. And so we're activated, it's 1 a.m. and we want to start to assess the potential impacts to our coastal communities. And then lastly, our exercise objectives. So first and foremost, we want to test, evaluate, and validate the current Ventura County tsunami response plan. That was the main purpose of this exercise, is how good is this plan? How familiar are you with this plan? Next is wanted to test the after hours recall of the OES team. So new OES director, everybody's has this thing where, so we all know that we are required to respond to disasters on a 24-hour basis, right? It could be after hours, could be on the weekend, could be on holidays. Well, the OES director really wanted to test that and see how many folks really did have their phones next to them, that if a phone call came in at 1 a.m., how many would actually respond and how many wouldn't respond. And then also, according to our emergency operations plan, the county EOC, from the moment that we issue or we say that we want to activate the EOC, then we're under the gun to have it activated within 30 minutes. So it was two-pronged. First is, can the OES team respond at 1 a.m. on a business day? And then two is, how quickly can we activate the EOC? So those were two things that the OES director wanted to test. Next is this is more on the capability and function, is test our standard operating procedures to conduct countywide coordination. So this is coordination with not only just the county, but our cities. Public information, this is information management, getting information out to our internal and external stakeholders, and then focusing specifically on emergency notification. And lastly, we want to identify strengths, lessons learned, and corrective actions for the future tsunami response plan update. And that was really the purpose, is we were about to embark on a plan update. It had been 5 years. And so the OES director thought the best way to do that is to have an exercise that's going to lead back into the crawl, walk, run. All right, so what did the schedule look like? So we had that functional exercise. Again, we want to test, evaluate, and validate the current tsunami response plan. Following that exercise, we wanted to put on a workshop. It wasn't one workshop, there were multiple workshops on this. But this is to update that tsunami response plan. And then we want to take the elements that we had from the exercise, so all of the corrective actions from the after action review meeting, and want to incorporate that into the workshop and then build on it to create a new plan. And then once we create the plan, so I didn't include this, is then we actually write the plan, which we shifted from a response plan to a response guide. So I know it might not seem important, but a plan versus a guide, the guide gives us a little bit more flexibility, that these are things that we should think about during an emergency, not things that we should do during the tsunami threat, right? So it's from prescribed actions to recommended actions. That was really the shift that we wanted to do. So we had flexibility as an organization during the tsunami response. And then we wanted, once we had that response plan, then we would go through and start doing tabletops and then conduct another functional exercise. So that's kind of how we probably flipped the methodology a bit, from instead of doing the crawl, walk, run, we did a run, and then we reverted back to the crawl, walk, run. It just depends. Like, I just wanted to provide you another example that you don't have to follow the crawl, walk, run if you don't want to. If you're confident and you have a mature program, then maybe do a walk and run first, and then go back to a crawl with the training and the exercises. So just wanted to provide that as an example. And that kind of ends the formal part of the webinar. I want to turn it back over to Andrea to facilitate that live Q&A session. Andrea?
Thanks, Gil. Now let's dive into the discussion and Q&A portion of this session. We highly encourage you to submit any questions and comments that you may have in the chat or in the question box. So let me take a peek to see here. Okay. I have one question so far. You mentioned the 3 training topic areas. I work for a local government agency, and I wanted to ask if you recommended any additional training courses that you used to train your EOC team.
No, that's a great question. So in that template, I included 3 topic areas, right? So it involved incident management and response. It involved risk, crisis and risk communication, and it was the alert system, right? In my training and exercise program, I added another one, which was emergency operations center focused, or you can say department operations center focused. But this was like another bank of training courses that we put on that was specific to our emergency operations center team. And you could do the same thing with, let's say, your first responders, right? Or you can give them training that's very specific to them. But the EOC training was to give them overall EOC understanding and knowledge. In California, they created this whole credentialing program, which builds out 69 hours of training. So it was general emergency operations center training. And then we followed that up with very specific training that had the Ventura County flavor. So we had section specific. So we focus on like management section training. And then within management, if you were designated as the public information officer, then we provided position specific training, such as public information officer training. So you can definitely build out your program, if you're in, let's say, manufacturing, and you have very specific hazards and threats, then maybe you're focusing on hazardous materials training. And so you create this whole training on that. Your training can also be focused on, let's say, evacuation procedures or shelter in place procedures. So it doesn't, I want you to have the flexibility to create whatever training programs. They can be training programs that are provided by other organizations, or they can be internal training programs that you provide. Maybe it's your safety officer or your emergency management department or your security department. You can put on these very specific trainings and kind of put that into that training program as well. So that template, feel free to completely customize it and put your own flavor on it.
Great. We have another one that just came in. My organization hosts one exercise every year focusing on our emergency evacuation procedures. I would like to begin to incorporate our leadership team and how we can improve in our overall management and coordination of emergencies. What type of exercises would work best to engage our leadership team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really important. I'm glad that you mentioned leadership team, because that could be sometimes a group of folks that we're too afraid to exercise or train, or they don't want to be involved in it because, they might be, they're very busy, or, they have very challenging schedules. But I think it's so important because really that leadership team is going to provide you in an emergency. They're going to be providing that overall incident goals and incident objectives. I think the best way to engage them is in a tabletop. Again, focusing on that crawl, walk, run. Maybe you start off with a training to get them familiar and comfortable. So maybe it's a training that, here's our incident response plan, right? Or our procedure. And it's more of an awareness training. Maybe it's a seminar. Start off with a seminar and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then what you really want to focus into, and with my leadership team, we never put them through a functional or a full scale. They don't want to be involved in that. That's why they pay you to do that, right? They're not the boots on the ground. They're much higher level. But a tabletop exercise or a functional would probably be the two best ones to put on. A tabletop, I think, is the ideal one because it's an environment where you can keep it very small group, just the leadership team. You can have these questions that generate conversation. It's less stressful. You can look at problem solving. That's really what they're looking at, is those high level strategic problems. They're not looking at, the minutia, right? That's why they put us in place. But they're going to give you that overall strategy and maybe the policy side and say, hey, for this hazard, what's your policy? And this is what our policy says. Do you agree with that? And you can start having that facilitated conversation and really start to get that, from them. You're going to collect information and you're also going to share information. I think the tabletop is the best way to do that, the best format. And it could be an hour and a half. It doesn't have to be something, that's multiple hours. They don't have the time or the patience to go through that. So maybe an hour and a half tabletop is the sweet spot to engage them and then get them involved in your exercise program.
Great, thanks, Gil. We have another one on here. I'm struggling to determine the frequency of exercises when I put together our exercise calendar for the next couple of years. Do you have any example of the number of exercises you would host in a given year?
Yeah, that's a good example. Like, I think it's also going to depend on how mature your program is and how comfortable you are. But I put a mix of training and exercises in a certain calendar year. We always had this thing of, the full scale and functional take a long time to put together. So you can work your way back. So maybe in like year 2 or year 3, you want to do a full scale or a functional. So put that there at the end and then kind of work your way back. So because functionals and full scales take the longest and they're the most expensive, the most complex, a functional could take 3 to 6 months. A full scale could take a year to 2 years. So maybe put that at the very end. That's your run phase. Then I would say quarterly is a great way to engage. I always like quarterly. It's not too frequent. I think monthly is too frequent of exercises, but quarterly seems to be the right response. You don't want to wait too long because you're building knowledge, skills, and abilities. If you wait too long, then they lose those things and you're not being effective to build on those things. So I would say quarterly seems like a good way to do some kind of exercise, and it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be expansive, but it's just an exercise. And then add some training, right? So I like to do training right before an exercise. So that's kind of the schedule I would put on, is maybe 1 or 2 training courses, build that knowledge and skills, and then have an exercise. And then another training to build off on that, and then another exercise. So you're reinforcing the knowledge that was gained from the training. So I think that seemed to be a good thing. And then I would just say, when you're putting on these schedules, you don't want to put too little and you don't want to put too many. Try and find out what the sweet spot is with your organization. What's your budget? I think that's also going to impact how many you put on. If you don't have a budget, then maybe you're going to have to do less. If you do have a budget and you have investment, then you can definitely do much more exercises. So that's kind of how I dealt with it in Ventura County.
Great, thanks, Gil. We have actually another question. How would you recommend or plan routine training or exercise? Looking at the template, it looks like this is a very lengthy process. I'm looking for ways to improve staff situational awareness daily, specifically looking at active threats or active shooter events without disrupting operations in a very busy area, such as an emergency department, where a full scale would be very stressful.
Okay, no, that's actually a great question. So, and this is where, if you want to, so the template again is completely customizable. So it looks lengthy, but it doesn't have to be if that's not what you want to make it out to be. And we mentioned drills, right? I always liked, so let me preface this, that I was the county-wide training and exercise coordinator. So I was looking at building a schedule that was for the entire county. And that seems like a lengthy process because you have a lot of players in place. I also created a training and exercise program that's specific to our OES team. This is where I could do much more trainings in a much smaller scale, right? And I'll give you a great example. So I was the exercise and training coordinator, but I was also the alert and warning coordinator. And I put our team through, we had an OES duty officer cadre. And these are folks that, along with me, that we were on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That cadre got much more training and exercises than the larger team. And how I did this was, if you want to include more frequency, I would do weekly trainings with them and I would give them a scenario. And they could be no notice. It doesn't have to be formal. It could be during a staff meeting, or, it could be just, hey, you're sitting around and say, come up with something, right? I would just come up with a scenario and I would say, all right, I want you to log into our emergency notification system, and I want you to show me how you're going to activate for this specific incident. What preset template are you going to use? What's your message going to be? And it could be a conversation. Sometimes there were just conversations. Tell me what you're thinking now. Tell me your thought process as it comes to this hazard and threat. So they don't, and I would sometimes do this on a one-to-one basis, right? I would just go to the individual, or I would do the entire OES duty officer cadre, or I would do the entire OES team. So what's great about the training and exercises is it is so flexible. It's so customizable. You can literally do a 10-minute exercise that doesn't have to be formal, doesn't have to be on a certain training schedule. It could be on it or not. It depends on you, but I did that much more frequently than I did the more formal training and exercises. We were constantly training ourselves. We were constantly exercising on a much more informal, flexible schedule. And then seems like the next follow-up question, Andrea, was, is there a catalog of different scenarios that you would reference? Yeah, we'd have a great way to look at it is your hazard and threat scenarios. So we would look at it in two different ways when I would think about it. I would look at our hazards and threats. We also had standard operating procedures for a hazard or threat. So for example, when we're responding to the field, our response SOP for a wildfire would not be the same for a hazardous materials incident. So I would look at the SOP, right? I would use that specific plan and I would test on it. I would evaluate it. I would see how they would do on that specific one. So you can look at a certain plan or procedure. You can focus on a hazard or threat, or you can look at a list of functions. So I mentioned emergency notification. We're also involved in evacuation coordination, and we spent a lot of time talking about evacuation coordination, how we're going to work with law enforcement, how we're going to look with the fire department. Do they know our process? Do we know their process? And taking someone out to coffee, that could have been an exercise right there. Hey, in this scenario, how do you want us to work together? That is an exercise right there. It's a facilitated conversation talking about our procedures and our schedules. So the catalog, Kobe, was humongous. I had so much to choose from. Ventura County, we had a list of 18 hazards and threats that I could choose from. We had a whole bunch. We had an emergency operations center plan, and we had 15 annex plans: mass care and shelter, disabilities and access and functional needs, emergency notification, information management, logistics, resource ordering. I had a whole list of things that I could exercise on, and really it's looking at your current plans and getting ideas from them. So I would say be creative. Don't be afraid to be creative with what you want to exercise on. Build that catalog, have the idea. That exercise schedule gives you ideas. Okay, what do I want to do in this year, and what do I want to do in that year? And what I loved about it was it allowed me to be creative and think outside the box and come up with maybe unorthodox things to test. So don't be afraid to do that too. So that's what I would recommend. Those are, Kobe, 2 great questions.
Great. Thank you, Gil. It looks like we don't have any other questions lined up. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. If you have any questions or need any additional information, please feel free to email us at events@alertus.com, and we will be happy to assist you. If you're looking for more information on Alertus and our solutions, please visit our website, www.alertus.com. Thank you again for joining today's webinar, and we look forward to hosting you again soon. Stay safe and have a great day.
Thank you.